Hey, what's ready? Welcome back to News Toast, and sounds like Xbox and Nintendo's partnership together is about to explode in 2026. I mean, there has been some questions about where's Xbox and why are none of their games on the Switch 2 yet, but, well, we got our answer today, and I think this is really good news, not just from Xbox, but also for what this could potentially mean for the Switch 2 going forward. Now, we also got some alarming news for PlayStation users, and I do want to talk about that today as a bit of a warning more than anything else. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, and speaking of the Switch 2, they actually have a couple of surprise exclusives set for next year. One being the Duskbloods. I mean, it's still kind of hard to believe that Nintendo, out of all companies, secured a FromSoft exclusive, but also the Silent Hill 2 remake developer Bloober team. They're also working on a Switch 2 exclusive. Yeah, in a recent interview, they said that their unannounced game, Project M, will please fans of Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Limbo, and Eternal Darkness, and that whatever it is could only exist on Nintendo hardware. Now, that's a very curious statement to make because, I mean, unless it's tied to something like, let's say, Nintendo's mouse controls, or if it's related to a Nintendo-owned franchise, then it's kind of hard to imagine why it could only exist on Nintendo hardware as they claim. So I have seen some speculation online that maybe they're working on something like, let's say, Metroid as one such example. I mean, it is titled Project M as in potentially Metroid. Now, that might be a little too on the nose, though, but I mean, that is a series that has explored horror elements in the past, most notably in Metroid Fusion, and really even in Metroid Dread. So maybe they could do something interesting with the Metroid series and a true survival horror experience. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is, but whatever it is, they seem to be extremely excited to reveal it in 2026. So I'm thinking maybe at an upcoming Nintendo Direct here sometime soon, but let me know what you think. Do you have any guess as to what Project M could potentially be? Now, speaking of early 2026, 007 First Light has officially been delayed, though this really isn't too big of a deal, and I think it actually makes a lot of sense when you start to think about it. It was originally slated for March 27th, but it's now been pushed to May 27th. So, I mean, it's just a 2-month delay, and they said this is because they want a little extra time to polish the game, which I actually do view as a good thing in this situation. I mean, you have to remember that when they first revealed 007 First Light, GTA 6 was slated for May. And as we all kind of know, every publisher and developer are trying to avoid a launch near GTA 6. So now that GTA 6 has been pushed to late 2026, that does open a pretty significant window in May. And IOI is now using that window to better their game. Really, I think otherwise there would have been a chance that it could have been rushed out just to avoid Grand Theft Auto. And I think that says a lot about how conscious some of these companies are about GTA 6's launch. They fear it so much that they could actually potentially hurt their game by rushing it out instead. Nonetheless, though, I really hope that First Light meets expectations. I've talked about it before, but the old 007 GameCube titles were actually some of my favorite games as a kid. And even though First Light is vastly different from those, it's still just so nice to see that 007 is back in the gaming landscape once again. Now, we also got an update from Sandfall Interactive regarding their next game. Obviously, they've had a ton of success, and a lot of times when studios starts to see that type of success, they expand and scale up for their next project. However, Sandfall Interactive confirmed that that's not their plan for their next game. They said that, no, I think it's good to have limitations when you are creative. It's the best way to be the best version of yourself. We could scale up now that we have a lot more money, but I would say that it's not tempting for us because even the management team and myself, we'd have to be hands-on and doing things for ourselves. And I think that that's the perfect approach for them to take. There's this idea from a lot of game companies that bigger is better, but I actually hardly ever find that to be the case. I mean, how many times have you heard a new game get revealed, and one of the first things that they claim is that it's their biggest and most ambitious game ever? And let me just say it this way. You can have the biggest game that you want with the biggest world that you want. But if it's empty and boring, that doesn't mean a thing to gamers. So at the end of the day, bigger does not equal better. It really all comes down to creativity, design, and direction. And clearly the team that Sandfall Interactive has is perfectly capable of that. In fact, their biggest issue in development for Expedition 33 was that they didn't actually know how to develop games. They were really learning on the job. They were watching tutorials on YouTube just to learn how to develop Expedition 33. So now that they have experience under their belt, now that they know how to do more things, theoretically that alone will put them in a much better position for their next game. So I actually like that they're staying small and nimble. A lot of times that puts creators in a better position because it allows them to have more input. All right, now let's just go and talk about Xbox and Nintendo's partnership, though, because I have seen stories this year, or really just reactions online, about how some people have been surprised by the lack of Xbox support for the Switch 2 during its first calendar year. You know, they do have that Call of Duty contract, and even a few months back, Reggie Fils-Aimé criticized Xbox for their lack of early support for the Switch 2, and even back then, I said that was not an Xbox problem. I think this is actually more of a Nintendo problem, and not just for Xbox, but for a lot of third-party developers. However, I do expect the floodgates to open in 2026, and I think we just got our first real sign that that will, in fact, happen. See, what's going on here is that Jez Corden from Windows Central claimed that the first Call of Duty Switch version is nearly done, and it's launching here in just a few months. And that is massive news alone. I think this once again supports the idea that Nintendo will have a direct in early 2026, so go ahead and queue up the rumors before all the Nintendo tubers start the leak train. But yeah, this will be a huge game for them to announce. But that takes me back to the idea that this has been a Nintendo problem. See, Jez Corden also claimed that Xbox didn't have dev kits, which is something that we've heard a lot about in the early part of the Switch 2's life cycle. You know, multiple third-party developers have publicly complained about how selective Nintendo has been about their Switch 2 dev kits. And hey, that's perfectly fine. You know, if Nintendo wants to be selective, then they have every right to do that. But at the end of the day, the repercussion for that is exactly this. Third-party support will be slow out of the gate, which is definitely an odd decision, I think, from Nintendo. I mean, nobody questions Nintendo's first-party catalog. They have an amazing first-party catalog, but they also have a real opportunity to surprise people this generation in regards to their third-party support. So for them to slow down the process is definitely an odd choice from a company that has struggled with third-party support in the past. But nonetheless, I do expect an explosion of Xbox support for the Switch 2 in 2026. Not only for Call of Duty, but for other games as well. I think there's a fairly good chance that we're going to see ports for games like Sea of Thieves, maybe potentially Grounded 2, possibly Forza Horizon 5, and, you know, there's a lot of Rare games that they could work from, maybe possibly Killer Instinct, and there's also the potential that Spyro 4 could launch on a Switch 2 next year as well. So for those that have been complaining about the lack of Xbox support on the Switch 2, your questions will likely be answered soon with the upcoming Call of Duty. Like I said, though, I think this is also a really good sign that we're going to see a lot of third-party support for the Switch 2 in 2026. Now those dev kits are circulating, and really, it's only a matter of time by this point. Now, one more thing before we go, though, because a new alarming report surfaced online regarding a PlayStation Network hack. Yeah, and that's the thing, because anytime people hear about a PSN hack, there's that sudden memory of the PlayStation 3 hack back in 2011, which I believe is still one of the biggest hacks of all time. I mean, it took down their online servers for several months. I was a part of that hack, unfortunately, but this time, we're not talking about an issue of that scale, thankfully. Yeah, nonetheless, though, I do want to talk about this today just more so as a warning of what not to do. So this news comes from a French journalist, and We'll just read it here. Insider Gaming wrote that a journalist at the French publication Numerama has discovered a major security flaw with PlayStation Network. The report dives into an incident in which the journalist's account was hacked despite two-step authentication protection. The user's account login ID, email address was changed, and he was charged €10 as the hacker had changed the username. The journalist was able to recover their account by getting support over the phone, but what's interesting is the information they needed to retrieve it. The report reveals that after spending some time on the call, all the information that they needed to share was their PSN username and a transaction number from an old invoice. The year didn't matter. With that, the journalist recovered their account. However, it was hacked again within an hour. This time, the user was unable to reach PSN support on the phone and decided to contact the hacker themselves by messaging their old PSN account from a new one. So, on one side, it shouldn't be that easy to hack an account. He unfortunately had it hacked twice in quick succession, so hopefully Sony will get this fixed up, especially if awareness for it increases. But again, let this be a lesson for you, not to post your invoice online. I have seen people do that from time to time on Twitter where, they pre-order something and they like to post it up as kind of, oh, well, I secured my order. So just kind of be careful about doing that type of stuff going forward. And not just for PlayStation, but just in general, be careful with that type of information online. Again, though, hopefully Sony will address this sooner rather than later. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.